Welcome to WitchLit, a place to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. You can support WitchLit and the serious book habit it requires at ko-fi.com/WitchLit podcast. And you can be part of the show by sending in your own death, sex, religion, politics, money questions for our guests to victoria@witchlitpod.com. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and give us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. It really does help other witches find the show. Here's to never getting to the bottom of our to-be-read piles. Awyn Dawn is the award-winning author of Paganism for Prisoners, Connecting to the Magic Within, and Paganism on Parole, Connecting to the Magic All Around. Her articles have been featured in Spirituality and Health magazine, The View magazine, and Llewellyn's blog. Originally from Colorado, she spent several years volunteering in the prison system, teaching spirituality to the incarcerated. She has since earned a Bachelor of Science in Integrative Healthcare from MSU Denver. She is Reiki attuned and certified as a peer specialist. She has taught creative writing workshops in 3 countries and is now earning her MFA in creative writing while living in London. Awyn Dawn, welcome to WitchLit.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. I'm excited to talk about your book and writing and being in London and all that good stuff. But the first question for all of our guests is, why write?
Oh, why not write? I mean, since, even before the invention of the printing press, writing was how messages got disseminated to people. And before writing, there was the oral tradition of storytelling. And so writing is just a continuation of that oral tradition of storytelling where we, sat around the campfire and learned lessons. And it's one of the most impactful things I think a person can do with their life.
I like that. So you have written 2 books, and we had, as listeners know, you and I get to chat a little bit before they get to hear a conversation. And so we talked about I've read your new book. I have not read the first book, but now after reading the second book, I'm going to go back and get the first one and read it.
Yay.
But I just, I think because of the titles and the subject matter, Paganism for Prisoners, Paganism for Folks on Parole. So people who have not been incarcerated or who have not, been involved with the, prison system, I still think this book is really valuable for them. And I kind of wanted you to talk about why you wrote the book and who the book is for and what that process of getting published was like, because it is, I think, unique in the space of kind of paganism publishing.
Yeah. So there's multiple parts to this question. So I'll start with the who my books are intended for. So that there's many audiences. Of course, in my first one, Paganism for Prisoners, people who are incarcerated are, of course, a big part of the target population. But I wrote it with the idea that I wanted to give people the ability to use magic, to use paganism as a tool to grow. And so the book is really for anybody who wants to dive in. And I think we get really hung up, especially in witchcraft and paganism, on the tools of the trade, the athame and the sword and the candles and the cloak. And I love those things personally, I do, but they're not where the magic comes from. And so I really wanted to restore it in both of my books to a place where you're owning that magic. You don't need to wait until you have hundreds of dollars worth of tools. You always have the ability to access your magic. And so I really wanted to help people find these within themselves. And then as far as how they came about, it was almost divine intervention in a way. So as I say in my first and I think my second book, I was incarcerated. I got out. I found a teacher, got first degree, second degree, third degree initiations. And I was doing work with incarcerated women. I was teaching witchcraft to inmates, which is still one of my favorite things to say, because they loved it and they embraced it. And right actually before COVID hit, I got introduced to someone from Llewellyn who just loved the idea of a book for our incarcerated brothers and sisters, and really advocated and went back to Llewellyn and was like, hey, let's get this book published. And so that's really how the process kind of came about. And the rest was, me submitting, proposals for the second and now the third book I'm working on. But yeah, it all started with that moment and that introduction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. Like, just sometimes it's that tiny spark between people that gets these things in the world. So one of the things I liked about reading through the book is kind of the side notes to parole officers in this book about, here's the things that you need to understand about, if you have people who you're responsible for on parole, if you're their parole officer and they are practicing witchcraft and paganism, here's the things you need to know. Like, their altar is sacred. Yes, having some kind of, tools that may not be allowed to someone who's on parole or living in a halfway house. But like, did you come to that from personal experience or from talking to people about, it would be nice if my parole officer, if somebody understood and I didn't have to explain everything, I guess, kind of.
Well, so I originally just had the one in there. And that one was about having an athame, because I went to my own parole officer and, I asked and I was denied, but I really, regardless of what the tool is, I think it's important that the pagan faith get treated with the same respect that any other faith would. You wouldn't tell a Christian they can't have a crucifix in their room, and it's along those lines. And then, it expanded from there and became more notes to more parole officers, because I got a lot of messages from parole officers saying, we don't know what to do with our pagan parolees. We know nothing about it. And so I really wanted to put the notes in there and kind of open up that dialogue. I think there can be this tendency to be, okay, you're on parole and I'm your parole officer and we have to be enemies, and that's not the case. They're there to do a job. You're there to not go back to prison. It's really not that difficult of a stretch. But we need to open up those lines of communication and understand how to talk to one another about it.
Yeah. So, I think that kind of goes back to that, the multiple audiences for the book. And I think as someone who has not personally dealt with the justice system in that up close and personal way, but I have worked with nonprofits and things, worked with people who have had those experiences. And I think it was really helpful for me just to kind of rethink about, I've been reading a lot about, prison abolition and restorative justice. And I think this is a good piece to bring into that, people come to paganism from lots of different ways. And then we can also look at the prison system and incarceration and all that stuff through the lens of being a pagan. I mean, that it's a two-way, I guess it's a two-way mirror in some ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so in Colorado, it's lumped together, Northwest European pagan, but the groups that relate to that are the fastest growing faith groups in the prison system. And so we really have to look at, why that is, and it shows no indication of slowing down, so, and there's a lot of reasons we can go into if you'd like, but there's this real power in the ability to access your faith without needing an intermediary. And I think that's one of the things. And it's also a calling home for a lot of people. There's this disconnect when you go to prison. You feel like you're no longer part of the human race anymore, and you get shunned by a lot of religious groups, or, told, oh, yeah, no, you need to repent, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. And all you need to do in paganism is try to learn from those mistakes. And that's not a pagan law. That's a universal law. Like, you will repeat your lessons until you learn from them. So I think, that's one of the things that's happening in prisons is people are feeling that disconnect and they want a way to feel connected.
Mm-hmm. I would think connected and empowered to
definitely
to take their lives back into their own hands. And when you, like you said, you're stripped of a lot, you're stripped of community, you're stripped of, your autonomy and agency, all of those things. So no, that totally makes sense to me. But I mean, one other aspect that I think has less to do with what the book is about and more about the book is it's so well written. Like, it was just a joy to read.
Thank you.
Like I think it's your voice is really approachable. And I mean, you're talking about a topic that some people would find difficult to approach. Like you said, people do have preconceived notions about things. And so I think, you just have this really breezy, but serious. I mean, it's not like unserious, but it is conversational kind of tone in the book. And I think that really shows in this. I know, and folks will know from your bio that you're currently pursuing an MFA. So like, what are your plans as a writer? Like, what are your big goals, and what do you want to do with your writing?
Oh man. So many things. I want to, so I'm really attracted to writing fiction. I love writing for Llewellyn. I'm going to, keep writing books for Llewellyn. But I also want to expand into fiction, because that's like, there's a certain level of change that happens in books like Paganism for Prisoners. And then there's a certain amount of change that happens from fictional books. They become cultural, they become woven into our identity. And I want to do that. So I'm working on a couple of stories right now, both dramatic and hopefully amazing by the time I'm done. But I want to normalize pagan characters, like there should just be a pagan character, and not because they have magic powers, not that, there's anything wrong with that, because, that's a big market, but like just a character who's like, oh, Hecate, I'm having a bad day today. Like, let's talk, and I would like to see more of that just in the world. And that's how you help make paganism accessible, is not by putting it like, oh, it's over here and it's these things, it's magic spells and it's charmed and it's, it is those things, but it's so much more. And so I want to write books that change how people see things like incarceration. I want to write books. The one I'm working on right now addresses mental health and how we look at mental health and how it relates to crime. And that's kind of a natural stepping stone from my previous books. But in this case, it's going to encourage readers to really challenge their thought processes. And so that's kind of what a small chunk of what I'm working on with my MFA.
Mm-hmm. Have you found being in an MFA program as an already published author is an interesting place to be?
It kind of is. It doesn't mean that I haven't learned a lot, because I have. The biggest difference, I think, is I don't have that, oh my gosh, am I ever going to get published anxiety? And because I don't have that, I feel more comfortable being able to play a little bit with my own work. And so I think that's the big difference. Like there's, some very talented writers in my program, and I hope they all get published, but because I don't have that fear that my work won't be good enough, because I already have tangible proof that says, maybe I'm good at this. It takes a lot of that pressure off, and I get to enjoy earning my degree. And that's a really awesome thing, because I love to write.
And I mean, I'm going to assume, based on your topics that you're writing about, that you are out to your fellow folks in school. Has that been an issue at all about being a paganism in the midst of the MFA program? I wouldn't think so in London, but also who knows?
Yeah, no, I bring up my books whenever I can. No, that's a half truth. No, I don't have any shame about who I am. And so it's not the first thing I tell people, but it comes up in conversation, and it's as natural as like we have Muslim students and Hindu students and Christian students. And it's just, it hasn't been a big deal. And I'll have other students in my cohort come up and be like, "Oh, I'm really into Buddhism." And I'm like, "That's cool. We can relate because there's definitely some overlap there." So, yeah, I haven't ever felt out of place for that, or even nobody in my MFA has asked if I've been to prison based off my titles, but that's also something like I don't have to be embarrassed about anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big step too, because for a long time I was. So, it's very supportive in my MFA program.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And I don't know, there's so many books written about London. I mean, before I went to London the first time, I felt like I had been there 1,000 times because I'd read so much set in London. And there is such a mystical underbelly to London. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so many books written about the magic of London. So what has your experience been like as a pagan in London, like coming from the United States to some place that feels so old and, all of those things about London?
I feel like there is a lot of magic here. Some of my a lot of my friends that I have here are from London, and they're like, "Wow, you get so excited about things like the fog." The first time I saw London fog, I was literally walking between two worlds. Like I could have walked into a fairy world just then. I could have, stepped over the threshold into Atlantis. There's all these. And then the buildings, like history. I'm such a huge history buff. Like I love European history. I can talk about it for weeks and months, and and so I've been to all the museums, and I'm always finding new places. And the Temple of Mithras is here, and Mithras is a pre-Christian deity, who had a big following, and even the foxes here. Like seeing there's a mama fox and a baby fox who live like right outside my window. And so like these things like this I'm always telling people magic is everywhere. It's not just in that sacred well. It's there too, but it's everywhere. Mm-hmm. Sunrise and sunset are magical times. And, being on the Thames when the sun sets, that's magic too. So yeah, it's definitely been a mystical experience over here.
Yeah, I know. I'm having travel envy right now. When we talked before, London is one of my favorite places to travel, and I feel like I could spend a life there and still not see everything I want to see. Like it feels like it changes every time you walk around the corner.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, cool. So you talked about the next book you're working on and kind of what does like getting started on a book look like for you, especially in the middle of an MFA program? Because that is a lot of work itself. So what is trying to write a book for publication and being in an MFA program at the same time?
Well, so it means I'm trying to write 2 books for publication is what that means. But it kind of starts with an idea. And I know a lot of people love to make like plots, and they plot everything out, and, that works for them. But I find, especially with the books that I write for Llewellyn, I sit down and I clear my head and I take a few deep breaths, and I just start jotting notes. I'm like, okay, what would I maybe like to see? And then I'll pick a section and I'll expand on that. And then I'll be like, okay, I like this section. Does it need more? And the book of spells I'm working on right now has actually taken on like a whole life of its own. There's going to be 111 of them in there. Oh, wow. And yeah. So at one point I was, listening to the sounds of the planets on NASA on their YouTube channel. And I was like, oh, this is great. We're going to, incorporate these into spells. And so it's about taking that inspiration. And I found the same thing applies to my fiction books too, because I start with this idea. And I type down the ideas that I have and just going through, okay, this works and this doesn't. And sometimes I write the chapters out of order, and then, I piece them together later. And it's this moving process. It's never stagnant. It's not like, okay, this happened and then this happened and then this happened. It's like, okay, and today we're going to focus on this, and then we're going to focus on this, and this didn't work. And the whole time I have to really remember what I'm trying to achieve. With my book of spells, I want to bring some of the principles from Paganism for Prisoners and Paganism on Parole to my spell books. So they're all about empowerment and personal growth and archetypes and these kinds of things, versus, job spell 101. And so having that in my head really helps me kind of formulate where it's going to go.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think about in reading Paganism on Parole, I mean, it seems like I don't think that someone who has been practicing wouldn't get anything out of it, but it seems like it's geared more towards somebody who either is newly discovering paganism as they leave incarceration or they discovered it while they were incarcerated. So like, would that experience, or how do you think that would be different for someone who's in that situation who is already a pagan and they kind of walk into that, being incarcerated or dealing with that? Like, it seems like there's a different challenge there to me, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I was pagan when I went to prison. I already worked with the gods, but it was very surface level for me. It was about wearing black and pentagram jewelry and the big the big pins, with the sayings on them, granddaughters of the witches, you couldn't burn. And, and that's where it stopped, and so even if somebody's already pagan, even if it's not just surface level, there's always an opportunity to deepen your spiritual connection. And that's what I think that the main difference is going to be, is where you're starting and how deep you're going to go. And that's going to be more of a personal thing too. Like if you're new, you don't even know how deep you can go because all you can see is the surface of the lake. And so you start there. But if you've already waded out, it gets deeper, and it's up to you how far you go.
Mm-hmm. I like that image too of the lake. That's great. Did you find, in writing the books, kind of laying those out and going through the process of writing that, did your practice change, or did you have things come up for you in writing the books?
Oh, absolutely. So I have kind of a varied background. I've got, a little bit of mental health. My undergrad is in integrative healthcare, which is, allopathic and holistic where they meet. And so incorporating these ideas, and I was getting my undergrad. Well, I wrote Paganism on Parole. And so I was like, oh man, that really fits with, the spiritual practice. And so I would weave them in, and short answer is my practice is always changing and always growing. It never looks the same twice. That's one of the best things about paganism, is it can change and grow with you. And, but yeah, every time I write a book, it shapes me in different ways.
Hmm. Do you think, what do you think was the biggest thing that came out of writing Paganism on Parole and working on that book?
I think the mental health aspect, devoting a whole chapter to that made me really have to look at my mental health. Coming from, most people who are incarcerated have backgrounds that are not so nice, and, really having to look at dealing with that. And, where was I comfortable being, and where did I want to be? And that was one of the biggest ones for me. And then, there's other stuff like I talk more about it in Paganism for Prisoners, but the clairsenses, clairaudience, clairsentience, those exercises that I come up with, I try those out first before I put them in the book. And so those are always going to have an effect too. But yeah, looking at emotional and mental, because there are two different chapters in the book. Those were so huge for me because I really wanted to put those into practice, practice what you preach kind of thing.
Yeah. And it was one of the things that really stood out to me reading it, is just how that the book addresses all of those things, because I think it's real easy to go, am I physically good? Am I mentally good? And not talk about emotional health and your spiritual health in those kind of things. And especially like you said, if your background is not great, if you've got a trauma background, and just being incarcerated is a trauma in and of itself, you know? So there's just dealing with kind of the fallout of those kind of things too, coming out of prison, and I was just like, yeah, this it just seemed very, like I was just thinking of imagine coming to this book as someone who really needed that space, and that you made such a good landing spot for them to really look at all of these things. So I'm glad that you also got something out of it, because I feel like I got something out of it reading it too. And
Good.
so it was
That
just
makes me
nice
happy.
that as a writer, like I always, I can't remember, like source amnesia, no surprises in the writer, no surprises in the reader. Like, your experience directly translates on the page to some extent. So I think it's always just nice to hear when writers have those experiences too. So
Yeah. And I think that makes it, you said it perfectly. It translates, what we're going through. And having that clear headspace when we write, so that we can, because I said this a lot when my first book came out, like I typed it up, but really like a lot of it came from some other place. I was sitting there and I got to be the conduit. And that's a really important thing to remember, because I'm far from perfect, and there's a lot of things in the book I'm like, yes, no, this is amazing, and this is what should happen. And most days I get it, and then, but we all have days that we don't. And yeah.
I mean, we're all a work in progress, right?
Absolutely.
At least that's the hope, that we're always a work in progress. But I think that I don't know that I've talked about this much with folks on the show, but like the vulnerability of writing, it's not just like you're putting your baby out in the world and will people like it. It's also like opening up to writing and letting yourself talk about those things. Like, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, I think in fiction, it's even more true, because people are always going to, even though it is a fictionalized story, they know it came out of your head. So they're going to assume things based on that, or have questions about, what is your experience with this? Which I always, kind of laugh as someone who writes a little bit of horror into their fantasy. It's like, no, I don't really fantasize about murdering people. It just happens in the books.
Oh my gosh, I love horror. Some of my work is like horror, gothic-y.
Yeah, I would not say mine is, but there are definitely elements thrown in there. Mm-hmm. So,
but yeah, that's actually healthy to be able to explore the dark side of humanity. Like I'm fond of saying that, the light is great, but you can't really see the light unless you've walked through darkness. So if you don't walk through it sometimes and entertain those ideas in your head, not physically going out, but at least like entertaining them, how much do you really know about yourself? Yeah. How much can you know about yourself?
Yeah, you got to look under the furniture sometimes. Yeah. So the dusty cobwebby corners can teach you a lot about yourself.
They can. I like that.
Yeah. I am looking forward to reading your fiction. So like, what do you feel like comes next for you? Like, obviously finishing MFA program, and like, what do you see your trajectory as a writer? Like, how are things going? Like, what's your 5-year plan, Awyn?
Oh, my 5-year plan. Oh my goodness.
Not really. I mean,
I've made a plan through till Tuesday, and that's about as far as I've gotten.
Hey, you're ahead of me. I think I have a Sunday planned.
So we're both doing good. I mean, like it's beyond tomorrow. So,
yeah.
I want to write books and speak. And if anybody's listening who's like a producer, I would love to host like a pagan travel show where I'm like, oh, and look, here's the Well of Breed, and like talk about the history. Like I would love to do that. Mm-hmm. It's on one of my goals list, but the path I'm on, I'm just going to stay the course.
Yeah.
And, finish my MFA and finish book I'm working on now for Llewellyn, and finish my fiction book, and just kind of see what happens. Because at this point, I don't really see myself ever going back to like, oh, I'm going to go work retail again, or, I'm going to go, sorry about that. Most writers need to have like a secondary job, but I don't ever see myself, writing part-time while I work full-time. It's just, I'm going to do the next right thing and be on more podcasts and, encourage my book to get out there. And oh my gosh, I know you guys can't see this, but she has the most beautiful orange cat on her lap. big cat fan.
Yeah. He is our podcast. He's also 15 and his health is not good. So he gets babied when he wants it. Thing. Let's put it that way. So
I bet.
Yeah. When he was sitting here very quietly mewing, like mom picked me up. But yeah, no, I think that's, it's just to me that balance of like how to figure out how to write as a life and like what you do. Like I'm very lucky in that. I mean, I do have like a part-time job remotely with a nonprofit. So I do still make a little money on the side from that, which is more than I make from writing. Let's be really honest. But,
true.
My husband pays the bills. I'm very lucky and privileged to be in that position. But yeah, it's difficult because, not only do you have to like figure out how to eat and whatever that is, but depending on what that job is that feeds you, if it's not writing, like it can't take away from the writing. Like right. You don't want it to be the thing that like when you finish that at the end of the day, you're too tired to write. So I think it's a hard balance to strike.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people try and do it the other way. And I get that because we're like, there's this fear of not having money, and there's this fear of not having a roof over your head and food. And, those are legitimate fears, sometimes though, for some people out there, just stretch your wings and let the wind catch you and like trust that it'll work. Mm-hmm. And that's what my process has been. And so far it's going good. It's getting a little better all the time. And so, yeah, that's where I'm going to keep going with that. And we'll see where I end up in 5 years. I plan to still be in London. Or if not London, somewhere elsewhere in the UK, because I really like it here. It rains and it doesn't rain a lot in Colorado. So I'm, and
yeah, a lot of people, complain about the weather, and I've traveled in the UK and I've lived in the Pacific Northwest, and I was like, no, that's the weather I love.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, it's like I like rainy gray days. I mean, the sunshine is beautiful, and I will take it when we get it, but I will take a overcast day.
I love it. Yeah, especially when it's just that soothing rain and at nighttime, and it's quite magical.
Yeah, and great writing weather. It's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned your desire for a pagan travel show, and I have to say that I have a desire to watch one. So I just feel like it's a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially so many people becoming pagan and like. Or, they were born pagan and are just discovering it, depending on your outlook. Mm-hmm. But like, yeah, just, going to pagan places all over the world and talking about it like that. Oh my gosh, that would be so amazing. Like even the, back to the Neolithic caves, the first pagan sites where they found bones and animal offerings and talking about that. And I just, yeah, definitely.
The closest thing I've seen, Damien Eccles is doing a YouTube show about, I think there's 2 episodes. The first one is New Orleans, where he lives, and then the other one is New York.
Okay.
And it is just kind of these walks around like places he knows and, just kind of like locations and like venues and things like that to talk about. And that's the closest thing I've ever seen. And it's on YouTube. And I don't think it's getting, it hasn't gotten the traction yet that it deserves. Maybe so people go watch. But yeah, so I think there's space for that. And I've always said, like the other thing I think about is that, there's so many curated shows about, like top 10 travel destinations for blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, what are the top 10 like pilgrimages for pagan people? Like, what are those? Let's
Absolutely
talk about that. So yeah, let's put that out in the universe and make that happen for you.
I would love that. Yeah. And you could even do it like just by country, in Europe, there's just hundreds of sites that people don't even know about.
Yeah. One of the, you talked about the Mithraeum in London. So yeah, I lived in Slovenia, in former Yugoslavia, for people who don't know where Slovenia is, for a year and a half when I was in college, and have traveled back several times since then. And they also have, I think there's 3 Mithraeums in like the eastern part of the country. And I have never actually gotten to go in them. Like every time I've been there, they've been closed for the season.
Oh,
So I've never gotten to see them. I've seen, photographs of things and I've been to the museum, but I haven't been actually in the Mithraeum. And yeah, it's one of the things I'd really like to check out. But yeah, you're right. Every country has something. And it'd be really interesting to get a rundown of that. Like, I mean, with the death of witch fox, I feel like we don't even have like a directory of like witchy stores anymore. Like we just need kind of this like compilation of, places and things that are important to us. So
like, hey, we're still here.
Yeah.
We're not going anywhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. So far in London, since we're on the topic of traveling and being places, so what has been like, aside from the fog, like what is your most magical place in London for you?
Man, that's tough. I absolutely love being by the Thames. Sometimes I will just start at like the Tower of London, and I'll just cross Tower Bridge, and I'll walk, and I'll cross a bridge, and I'll walk, and I'll cross a bridge, and I'll walk, and I'll cross a bridge, and you can cover several miles like that, and just listening to the water. And yeah, it's definitely one of my most magical moments, especially since I can just go see it whenever I want. Mm-hmm. It's a bus ride away. And I love that. And yeah, the fog was very magical. Oh, my very first London rain, because I came to London in 2021 for a visit. And it did not rain the whole 9 days I was here. And I was so sad because I wanted a London rain. I was like, where's my London rain? And so I moved out here and there was no rain. There was no rain. There was no rain. I took an open top bus tour. That's when I got my first London rain. And it's pouring down. And of course, I'm sitting on the top because, I just wanted to sit on the top, and that's where you get the good views. And it started raining and everybody's pulling out their umbrellas and going inside. And I just got to stay out there in the rain. It's like soaked, like so drenched by the time I was done. But it was kind of like okay, welcome to London. And so that's one of my most magical moments that I've been here.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. It's so funny. Like, when I lived in, the Pacific Northwest, B'd moved back to Tennessee, and a friend went out with me to help me kind of take care of some last moving things. We flew out together, and there had been this whole conversation about, it rains all the time, blah blah blah. And we were there like 4 days, and it was absolutely stunningly beautiful, sunny the whole 4 days. and I was like, people just keep this a secret so people don't move here. It's like, we just tell people it's miserable, rainy, cold all the time. But, like when it's beautiful, it's absolutely stunningly beautiful. And you can see forever. And, but yeah, it does rain a lot, but it doesn't actually rain all the time. So, the last time I was in London was in November, and it was right after the Olympics. So it's been a while. And we did the London Eye one day, and we bought tickets that you could just go whenever. You didn't have to have like a certain time. And so we waited until it was really sunny and rode, and you could see for miles and miles and miles from the top. And it was just like this, like, I think when you're on the ground in London, because it's human scale, it's not like New York where you're just walking through canyons of buildings. Like everything in London feels like human scale to me compared to like cities like New York. And to see how big London actually is, like to really be at the top of that observation and just look out at the river and how far back it goes, and it's just city as far as you can see, is just kind of amazing.
Yeah. I think I'm going to, I haven't been on the Eye yet. So I've been waiting for the right time, but yeah, now I really want to go.
Yeah, no, I do recommend. I mean, it is a touristy thing to do, obviously, but it was, to me, it was just like, it is obviously the highest point in London when you're at the top. And, it was magical. I mean, maybe overused word, but also true. It was very cool to have that experience. And then also just, like there's so many parts of London. And like I said, I've just visited, 2 or 3 times. So I haven't really I haven't lived there. I haven't lived with London every day. So I think I know. I'm fascinated by that experience, being able to do that, especially as an outsider. Like I do. It's funny to me that your London friends were like, "You get so excited," and I was like, "Yeah, because I haven't spent my life here yet." So.
Yeah, exactly. For the first couple of weeks, I was fascinated by people's footwear. Nobody wears heels. Nobody. And like in Colorado, people wear heels because you get in your car and you drive places. And like here, everybody's walking around. It's flats. Like people have like dress tennis shoes. I found it fascinating for like weeks. You know, it's just, I almost wrote a whole essay about the shoes of London that I had seen, you know, and yeah, it was, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And even,
oh no, go ahead.
Yeah. Even outside of London, I drove in London because when you move here, your license is good for a year. And so I drove to Southend, and that's a very ethereal place when the water goes out at night and it's just muddy. And yeah, it's beautiful though.
So that was the first time you had driven on the other side of the road. We'll not say the right side or the proper side. We'll just say the other side of the road.
The other side of the road and the other side of the car.
Yes.
So, you know, so shifting with my left hand, but you know, everybody's like, oh my gosh, was it so hard? It's not that different. It's really, especially if you've been driving in the US for, well, a really long time. I'm older than I look. So a couple decades I've been driving in the US, you know, so it's a little scary at first, but it's not that bad until you hit the roundabouts.
Yeah. Roundabouts here they make sense to me, but I think in my mind, driving on the left, they make less sense to me for some reason, which doesn't, I mean, there's no reason why they're different, but there is something about how my brain works that going around the other way is weird. So
yeah, it is a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, one of the great things I think about being able to spend any amount of time in Europe, you know, if you're there permanently or if you get to spend an extended amount of time there, is that it's so much easier to go to other places.
Yes.
While you're there. Like, you know, for here, it's like if you plan a trip to France, you're probably only going to get to France because it's expensive to travel between cities and all that kind of stuff. But winter there, like a weekend trip could be to France.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was actually in Nice 2 weeks ago. So in Spain and Monaco and Italy and yeah, they're all just like right there for less than a plane ticket in the US. So
yeah, that's exciting. I'm excited for all your adventures in writing and in living in London and traveling.
Thank you.
Yeah. So like I said, I want to be mindful of your time, but before we get to the last, our game of chance question at the end, I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell folks like what's coming up for you. If you've got anything coming, this will air in April, and like just think about like what's coming up for you. Are you going to be at places, or how they can get in touch with you or find your work?
So they can find me. I'm on social media. On Instagram, Awyn Dawn, spelled just like my name, AWYNDAWN. Same thing with Twitter, although Instagram, I can't focus on all social media accounts at all times. So it's primarily Instagram, a little bit of Facebook, Awyn Dawn Official on Facebook, awyndawn.com. I am open to bookings, to speaking and, you know, podcast events and all that. People can reach out to my publicist, Marcus with a K, Marcus I at llewellyn.com, to kind of request interviews and that kind of thing. Yeah, as far as that, I'm hoping to be up for a second writing award in April. And yeah, fingers crossed for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll see. That's about as far as I've got. But I make it a regular habit to post on my Instagram stuff that's coming up and to post on my Facebook stuff that's coming up. So follow me there, and I do my best to keep that updated.
Yeah, and that's good. And you mentioned the award season coming up, and it is mentioned in your bio, but you did win a cover award for Paganism for Prisoners.
I did, yes. And that's I never dreamed that I would win a writing award. When I wrote the book, I was like, well, I just hope one person finds it helpful, which I know they have, because I got my first piece of fan mail a few months ago, and
that's awesome.
Oh, yeah, somebody who is incarcerated. And the heart goes out. But I won the 2022 Cover Gold Award for the social justice category. So I'm hoping that my second book will be nominated as well. So voting for that starts in a few months. Even if I'm not in there, people should vote. Lots of great authors, lots of great books and music and stuff like that. And, everybody can vote on that. So really encourage people to go check that out and cast their votes.
And I'll try to remember to put a note with the show notes with your contact stuff. I'll put a note or link for Cover in there too, because I think it's not something everybody knows about, but it is really, like, they really do. It is the award ceremony for the kind of niche, world we write and inhabit. So
yeah, unless they want to give me like a Pulitzer or a Nobel Prize for Paganism for Prisoners, which I think maybe they should consider. But until we get to that point, Cover's an incredible award to win.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, you wouldn't say no to a Pulitzer. No, I can't blame you.
I wouldn't, I guess I could take one. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So our game of chance basically is the initial thing was that it was things we're not supposed to talk about or in polite company, which kind of the whole podcast. That's kind of why I want to have a podcast, just to be able to talk about stuff people don't necessarily talk about. So I will roll a die, and depending on what I get, you'll get a question about death, sex, religion, politics, or money. And if I roll a 6, you get to pick which one you want. So,
okay.
And they are kind of related to your work or writing. I mean, I try not to just like blindside people, but 5, money.
5. Ooh, okay.
Yes. Interesting. So I think, one of the topics that comes up again and again with writers on the show is that a lot of us do not write for money.
Right.
Our living is not made writing. There are obviously writers who make a living. But what do you think, like, having been through the process of publishing industry, what do you think your biggest beef in the publishing industry is around like money and how writers are paid? Or do you have one? Like, what do you think, what could be better, or what do you think is not working?
Oh, no, that's a tough question. Like, something that was new to me that I didn't know is that I could negotiate my contract. Like, I had no idea when I got my first contract. And I actually kind of found out accidentally because I became, a member of the Society of Authors here in the UK. And they're like, oh, we offer free contract review. And I'm like, we can review my contract. And so, like, I had no idea. Like, you just get an offer and you're like so excited to get published. You're like, yes, I will take this offer. And, I think Llewellyn's offer is probably fair. I haven't compared it to other industries, so I don't know, but I'm going to make that assumption because they tend to be an ethical publisher. But I didn't know that and authors don't talk about this kind of thing with each other. We're not like, oh, what percentage of sales are you getting? Did you get not so much about what our royalty statements look like, but did you get what's it called? That initial amount.
Oh, in advance.
Yeah. Did you get an advance? What did your advance look like? How do you market? How do you charge for things like podcast interviews or public appearances? Like, we don't have these dialogues. And I think that makes it really hard for the new author who doesn't have connections to figure all this stuff out, and and if I do a workshop, what should I charge? I have no idea. And so, and you can Google this stuff. And unfortunately, when you Google the stuff, a lot of the stuff is written by people who haven't actually traditionally published. They're making an educated guess. They're like, oh, and the numbers range between like $5 and 50,000. You're like, that's quite a big range. And it's not helpful at all. And so my biggest qualm is that so many of these things are in the dark. And, I would like there to be like a FAQ like, hey, congratulations, we're publishing your book. Here's some questions that you don't even know you should ask about contracts and, insurance and taxes and, so much stuff, because you essentially work for yourself when you're a writer. And so there's, there's taxable income, and like, if I buy a laptop, can I take that off on my taxes? And like all these questions we don't know because nobody has a conversation about them.
I mean, talk about something we're not supposed to talk about. I mean, you're right. Writers traditionally don't talk about their advances. They don't talk about what their royalty split is. They don't talk about those things. And I think, because my husband and I started a small publishing company. We started initially because I got the rights back to my books and we wanted to publish them ourselves. And then we're like, but we want to do this for other people too. And that was kind of our first thing, is we want to be absolutely transparent. And we want to make sure that the people writing the book are the people who are making the majority of the money. But it's like shrouded in mystery. And it's almost like, I've heard writers talk about, like, it's almost like if you have the gall to ask, then maybe you don't deserve to be published. And I'm like, that's garbage.
That is garbage.
That's absolute garbage. Like, it is a contract like anything else. You should be able to negotiate, but it's expensive to get a lawyer. It's expensive sometimes if you don't belong to a writers guild or society to have somebody look at your contract. If a lawyer is going to charge you $1,000 out the gate, that may be, if you don't get an advance, that could be your royalties for a year. Or more. Yeah. So you spent everything you would have made just getting a lawyer to look at the contract. And people don't tell you that you can keep the rights to things, that you can keep the rights to your audiobook and do what you want with it. That you just you weren't told those kind of things. So I think it is important. And I do wish we had, like, I don't know. Like, I think authors guilds and writer societies, and I really recommend people who, whether you're self-published or indie published or publishing with a traditional publisher, it's good to have other writers that will talk to you about those things and look at, look at your contract and see, what's in there. Do you agree with it? Is this what you really want? And I think, I feel like it's, the pandemic has telescope time in a weird way. I want to say it was like a year, year and a half, 2 years ago, when there was the whole thing on Twitter about writers publishing what they had been paid advances, specifically talking about how underpaid Black writers were compared to other writers in genre fiction. And, a lot of people said, I didn't get an advance at all, or I got like $2,000, and this other person who's writing, who's a first time author, got like 45,000. So I think it's interesting. And, the more we talk about those things, the less they can hide from us, I think, as writers. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's weird that I got the money one. I was like, come on, sex question. But...
Well, I can ask you the sex question because this is a game with no rules.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Let's do the sex question.
So you kind of bring up in the book that love and sex magic done to change another's will to be attracted to you or want to be with you generally goes awry. Yeah. So what would you say to someone who's coming out of, the isolation of incarceration, who wants to do magic for love and companionship? Like, what would be the first thing you would recommend to them?
That they do a spell to love themselves. That's the type of, when you get out, stop going for the first person you meet and like forming a relationship and building your identity and your life around that. But just stop it. Just stop. Even if you haven't been, stop it. Do love. You can always do like you know what? I want to learn to love myself more. I'm going to do that spell. You can do that spell all day long without consequences, without influencing anybody else's will. You can do, I believe I have a friendship spell in there, because friendships are more important than romantic love when you get out. You need people who are going to be like, maybe you shouldn't take that job where they're going to work you 90 hours a week and not pay you. Maybe you shouldn't do that. Friends do that, and those are the more important kinds of love to focus on. Like we tend to think, oh, love, that's, significant other. It's spouse, it's partner. That's what it is. But there's, love between family, there's love between friends, there's loving yourself, there's loving your community, there's the love that we have for the planet Earth that we're on. These are all things that should be people's focus more than, oh, I've been out of prison for 3 months. I think I'm going to die alone because I haven't found that perfect person. Stop it. Just stop. Yeah. And like, I've been single for a long time. I love being single. Oh my God. I look at all my friends who have like kids and, they're like, oh, well, my husband, doesn't think I should spend this money. I'm like, okay, well, I don't have to answer to anybody. So I'm going to go buy my ticket, and there's this beauty and this freedom in eating dinner by yourself on the Mediterranean, and being okay with that. And so that's where people need to focus on, is that being okay with self. Once you get to that point, then you can work on relationships, and that's a natural magic. If you're attractive to yourself, if you're like, man, I'm a good person, other people are naturally going to be attracted. So you don't even have to cast a spell.
Yeah. I liked what you said about soulmates, because it's always been a hobby horse of mine that, people have this idea that soulmates are the person you're supposed to spend your entire life with. And I was like, yeah, I've never believed that. So I like that you bring it up in the book, because I'm like, yeah, a soulmate could just be someone that you have a lesson to learn with. And you, like you said, it could just be they're in your life very briefly just to make that contact about that thing. I mean, it could be someone you spend your life with, but it could be your mom. It could be.
It could be.
Yeah. It's not necessarily, a romantic partner.
And I don't like the idea that, like, if you don't have a soulmate, you're not a complete person. Like, who is coming up with this crap? Like, you are complete on your own. And if you happen to find somebody who is also complete on their own, and you guys decide that, vibrationally you mesh, and that's awesome. And you keep it for as long as it works. And then when it doesn't work anymore, you part ways like this forever and ever and ever. It's such a toxic idea. That's why women stay with, like, well, one of the reasons, women stay, toxic relationships, or, where there's an increase, as somebody who dates people, there is an increase in like needy, codependent, like, people in the world, because everybody's, oh, I need that person to complete me. And you're fine. Like, do some work on yourself, work with some archetypes and some shadow work, be a little better person than you were yesterday, but you don't need somebody to complete you. And I really wish we would stop telling people that, and like just reframing it. Oh, like, it's not a soulmate. It's I forget what the new one is, but it's essentially a repackaged soulmate, like
a twin flame, your twin flame.
Yes. The twin. I'm like, stop. Just, it's, and well, like, and when you get down to it, we're all just balls of energy anyway.
Yeah. And I think it's important. Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, I think it's important, not just if you're single, but also if you're already in a relationship, to remember that you are a complete person by yourself, even if you're in a relationship. I mean, my husband and I have had this conversation, like, we unfortunately have a lot of our friends and acquaintances relationships over the pandemic crashed and burned, or just ended for other reasons. It put a lot of pressure on relationships. Right. So, and we have had this ongoing conversation in our relationship that I love you and I love being with you and I choose to be with you every day. And if you left, I would be really sad, but I'm still a human and a person, and I would still be me, with or without you in my life. I still have to be a person by myself. I still have to grow and change and do those things. And I think it's important to not forget that if you're already in a relationship, even if you think you're in a healthy relationship, that, yes, your lives are intertwined, because that's what happens when you spend years and years with someone. But if for some reason they are no longer entwined, you don't stop being a person by yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
No, I was just really glad you said that in the book, because it is personal, like I said, it's a personal hobby horse of mine that it's just, I think, I don't know, I always call it, like Disney has a lot of explaining to do. That's not right. How romance and love work. That's not how it works. Yeah. And I agree that, friendships are your ride or die. Honestly. I mean, I've had friends a lot longer than I've had any relationship with a significant other.
That's true. Yeah. And those friendships are a lot harder to find. Like you can always find somebody who's willing to sleep with you, who's always, but somebody who's like willing to tell you the truth or, about uncomfortable topics or, somebody who will just sit there when you're crying and have a bad day and like, oh, let's go have ice cream. Like that's so much. It's so precious.
Yeah. You can actually ask a friend if you look okay in this outfit and they will be honest with you. They will not worry about repercussions the same way that your partner might. Yeah.
That is not the color you should be wearing, sweetheart. Yeah. That's.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a small thing, but it's big things too. Like, I think, and they also, I think when you have really long-term friends and it is really like, they know who you used to be and they know who you are now. And they love you anyway. You have changed and grown, and they've made space in their relationship with you for you to change and grow like that. Like long-term relationships, I think like you're right. I think in many ways they're a lot healthier because you don't have that added pressure of like romance and sex to really see a whole person in a friendship that you may not in a romantic relationship.
Yeah, definitely. And cat and dog relationships are important too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. It's like when Ryan came and jumped up earlier, like, yeah, I think I've already told my husband, like, we know he's not doing well. It's like, just accept that I'm going to have to take a week vacation to cry unconsolably when this cat
I'm so sorry.
makes his passage, but hopefully we'll get to keep him for a while longer, but things are kind of, he's just getting old and he's not got great health. He's not going to be a 25-year-old cat. We've just kind of accepted that. So it's hard. It's hard to let them go.
Yeah.
They, for tiny creatures, they make really big holes in your life when they leave. So
yeah, for sure. I had a hamster. Loved this hamster, and hamsters have like a 2-year lifespan, but like I was devastated when this hamster passed away, and like took him up to the mountain and did a ceremony and like yeah, because little hearts with a lot of love.
Yeah I've always admired people who can have pets that have such short lifespans, because I think I would just be devastated all the time. So cats and dogs, that's about the longevity window for me emotionally I can handle. So
see, you need like a dragon because they live for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Yeah.
Well, I also think about people who have parrots that, they basically have to figure out who the parrot will go to when they die.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's like you have to think about those things. But I feel like we could talk about things forever, and it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. And definitely when you get your next book, or whether that be the fiction book or the new Llewellyn book, let's do this again and talk about
absolutely
how are things progressing and more magical things about London. So
okay, and I'm sure I'll have plenty. Like you said, I've been to so many places, and I don't feel like I've seen like a tenth of it. It's
yeah. Like I said, I'm convinced that London is a shapeshifter anyway. So I think even if you thought you had seen it all, you haven't.
Oh, yeah. No, that feels true. I feel like that's accurate. Yeah. Just one street over is completely different. You're like, what? Where was the? Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. Well, let's talk soon. And thank you again for being on the show and for putting these great, important books out in the world.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press. Our intro music is Cosmic Glow by Andrew Kay, and our outro music is Voices by Alexander Shanekar. Transcripts and all our previous episodes are available at witchlitpod.com. And you can follow us on Instagram at WitchLitPod. Thanks for listening and for reading witchy.